Hello, hello. We're back here with Words First, the podcast where we talk to Storybrand guides and other marketers about how to use words, language, text, copy, whatever you want to call it, in your marketing, and specifically how to implement principles from Storybrand in your marketing. And I am here with a good friend and Storybrand guide, Paige, who literally has the best name for a copywriter in the world. We're going to talk about when to break the rules today, which I know Paige is the perfect person to talk to.
Literally my favorite thing to do, break the rules.
So Paige, give us your 30-second
My
intro.
one-liner?
What
God.
do people need to know about you? Why should we care about what you have to say?
So I am a marketing and messaging strategist and copywriter. And what I like to say is that I help businesses that give a shit sell to their ideal customer without sleaze, without bro marketing, and without feeling icky.
It would be great if there was less icky in the marketing world in general. So
Fully agree. I mean, it is my mission in my professional life to rid the world of bro marketing one client at a time.
Okay, so Paige, you are a Storybrand guide. How long have you been certified as a guide? And why'd you do that?
That's a great question. So I got certified in September of 2019, and I was actually on the fence about whether to continue on with my full-time solopreneurship. I was entertaining the possibility of actually going to work with HubSpot as like a training person, which would have been a really cool job if the pandemic hadn't happened. Looking back now, I'm like, I've just dodged the biggest bullet, because I would have been grounded, and I would have been doing like literal hours every single day training people up via Zoom. I would have murdered my soul. So I had bought and paid for the training and certification. I was planning my last interview at HubSpot and ultimately decided, okay, it's going to be Storybrand. I'm going to give myself another chance. And what did it for me was what originally got me hooked on Storybrand. I'm going to tell the listeners a little secret. Here I go, breaking the rules already. I have never finished building a Storybrand.
The book?
The book.
How far did you get?
Chapter 3.
Second chapter, third chapter?
Chapter 3. And it was after reading chapter 3 that I practically threw the book across my office and said, holy shit, how have I not been using this for my entire career as a marketer? I could see that it was going to be the thing that unlocked it for me. And it did. Because I'm a good writer. I'm a naturally just a good writer. But every time I went to work with a client, every time I went to write a website, put an email together, I would have to start from scratch and try to put my brain, or pull their business's brain into my brain and just like do this osmotic download and make a lot of assumptions about what they wanted to say, how they wanted to say it. I was like, surely there is a better way, but I didn't know what it was. And then I read the book and I was like, oh my God, there's a framework.
Read some of the book.
Listen, we don't need to dwell on that. I'm actually like a little bit embarrassed that I haven't finished the book, but I also, I feel like the framework is tattooed on my insides at this point. So
there are other ways to get that information.
Yes.
You've fully downloaded it into like your understanding and all that. It doesn't have to come through book form.
Yes.
We've heard Don talk about it. We've heard JJ talk about it. We've gone through all this stuff.
Yeah, we know.
You went through the training, all of that. Okay, I'm glad you told that story because one, it tells us you do like the Storybrand framework. Like it's a great framework. It's helpful in your business. You think it's great. Clients should know about it.
It's completely changed the way I work. And I actually have relatively few people who come to me now knowing about Storybrand. And that's okay. Even if someone comes to me having no idea what Storybrand is, I am going to use Storybrand in my work with them. I don't need to hit them over the head with, this is Storybrand. but it's always going to be the foundation of the work I do for them because that's how rock solid the framework is.
Yeah, I think the thing that's very exciting about the Storybrand framework to me, I see it as a tool that I will use forever. I feel like it really taps into some fundamental truths about how humans communicate and see themselves. And it's a really helpful thing for us as marketers to understand when we're working with clients. The brand name, Storybrand, it becomes less and less important, I think, as you grow in your career as a marketer or as a guide or whatever that is. But the tool continues to be like pretty powerful. But today we want to talk about, okay, so we've got this great tool. I think, and I think you think, that Storybrand can cease to be a helpful tool and become more of a prison if you try to implement it in a really like rigid or templated way. Absolutely. And so it actually ceases to be this powerful tool because people sometimes assume that it's actually more of like a magic template, that if you just apply this to whatever you're doing, it will mean the results are great. Yep. And what I've seen is that sometimes if you've been to a lot of Storybrand websites, you see a very like similar look and feel. And for me, as soon as I can recognize, oh, that's a Storybrand site, it actually pulls me out of whatever story they're trying to tell, disengage, and I'm more like recognize. Now, I'm a person who knows.
So I have to wonder like how many people who aren't directly looking for a Storybrand guide to help them with their marketing, how many people are really going to look at a website and think like, gosh, something's familiar here?
Yes, I think that's less likely. That's me for sure. I go.
It's me. It's me too. Trust me.
Storybrand. Now, this has impacted me as a guide when I went through and redesigned my own agency site. What was really important and a thing I was really thinking about was if people are searching for Storybrand guide or Storybrand web designer or finding me on the Storybrand directory, they are comparing me to a lot of other Storybrand guides. Yeah. And if we are all creating websites that look the same, it's impossible to make an educated decision.
It's almost like it turns us into a commodity.
Yeah, it lowers the value. It turns us into a commodity. And so one of the taglines or phrases that I like to use is different is better than better. And so a big goal that I had when I was doing my site was I wanted it to feel different than a typical Storybrand site.
Same.
But I also had to ride that line where people were looking for a Storybrand web designer. So they had to recognize that we knew what we were talking about and that we were using the tool, the framework that we believed in and that we were trying to sell to them. They had to see that we knew what we were doing.
So that's really interesting. I don't explicitly sell myself as a Storybrand guide, especially not anymore, but even at the outset of my guidedom, it wasn't like my whole thing because I've been a marketer and a copywriter for a long time without Storybrand.
Right.
So it's something I, included on my website. But I remember that when I got certified, I allowed myself to get boxed in by the framework and the template that they offered because I hadn't gotten my sea legs with the framework yet. I am in the process of taking a new website live. I just got the preview link and it's kind of unhinged and I love it. And it checks a lot of the boxes of the framework. It expands on a lot of things because as a copywriter, I want people to see my copy. And as a copywriter who specializes in brand voice, I need people to see my voice. But then even with the design, I didn't want to feel boxed in at all by the template, the templatized look that we see so many other places. So I literally told my designer and also like one of my best friends, Jenna at Blush Cactus, go nuts.
Right.
Get weird. Like just lean into everything you know about me. So the result was this, like I don't think you would know I'm a Storybrand guide. And the people who have reached out to me looking for a Storybrand guide have actually said, I hope this doesn't make me sound like a dick. They've said, I'm reaching out to you because your site, your writing is different.
Mm-hmm. Different is
better
than
better.
Well, and here's the thing behind that phrase too, is that it's very hard to prove that you're better. Especially when there's it's a competitive space, right?
Yes.
So whether you're a Storybrand guide or I work with a lot of accounting firms, how are you going to prove that you are a better accountant than the guy down the street? I mean, maybe you've worked with more clients, maybe you've got great testimonials, but it's a subjective scale.
It is.
What is better? But when people see something different, they can make a decision. They're comparing things.
And
so
if they see something different, they're going to know if it's a different that they like, they're going to be able to say, I think I understand why I'm leaning toward this person.
Yep.
Another Storybrand guide whose website I worked on, her tagline ended up being "Stand out in the sea of sameness." And it's so important just like, even if your freak flag is really little, just like wave it a little bit, because that signals to your people.
Yeah.
And it signals to the people who aren't for you, like, hey, maybe you should go.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
So,
you don't
which I think is amazing. I think copy that says "girl, bye" is just as valuable as copy that says, hey, come on in.
Right. Yeah, it should qualify. And actually there's so many good things about being clear about who your customer is, because you can charge more from the right fit customers. Yeah. When you say we don't work with everybody, that's a good thing. And you can communicate that through, hey, we don't work with everybody, as copy, or you can communicate it through the tone and through the style and all that.
I like a no assholes clause, personally.
Yeah. That's a good one. You should always have that.
Have one.
Yeah.
Does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me. Although not that anyone would ever call you an asshole, but there's a directness about Paige Worthy that is not going to be the right fit for everybody too, right? Like there are some people who wouldn't want to work with you because of the directness or the way that you kind of approach copy. They want someone who has a really light corporate touch or whatever that is.
And it's like, it's not that I can't write to that, but I probably don't want to either. So it's
probably not where you're most valuable.
It's not what lights me up.
As a copywriter.
It's not what lights me up. So anyway, onward.
Okay. So we're talking about the framework, right?
Yes.
So here's specifically, I think, so you do a brand script, you work on your messaging. I think that there's usually like 2 or 3 phases. I guess this is for my process. I always go through one process that I think of as the logic phase, which is understanding what does the customer want, or what does the hero want, what are their problems, internal, external, whatever. And it's really like just making sure all this stuff flows together, the logic is right, that the want is connected to the problem, and the empathy
and that
isn't a repetition.
All the problems are connected to one another. And
so it's just about like, are we talking about the right stuff? And then you have to go through like the wordsmithing phase, which is like, how do we make this more interesting and enjoyable and stand out and pretty? Now, that's not really my sweet spot. Like the wordsmithing is not really what I'm great at.
And that's okay, because it's mine.
Yeah, and for me, actually, like I like to jump to the next phase, which is like the wireframing and the layout or the translation, right? So you're taking a brand script, which is a launching pad for like application in some way. And I do that through websites in a lot of cases. Now, Storybrand, when I became a guide, which was in 2017, they didn't actually have a prescribed wireframe at the time. They hadn't told that was a thing that was still in development. And the reason I believe that they created that was to give people a little bit more direction, because people didn't always know how to take the brand script and turn it into a website well. And so there are these wireframes out there. And what I've seen happen is that a lot of people take the templates, like the official like wireframe order of things, and just plug and play the brand script into it and turn it into a website. Now, if
that
you're
always turns out really great.
Well, if you're starting out, if you're a business owner and you're just trying to apply Storybrand, this is not a bad place to start.
All right,
if you're
fine.
a guide and this is the first couple websites you've done, maybe that's what you need to get started. But
Yep.
it's not a rule that should never be broken. It gets you started, but then you need to make changes. So there's two big changes you can make. One, you can take stuff out from the template that would normally be in there, and then two, you can add stuff in. So let's talk about that.
Great.
Let's talk about, when do you break the Storybrand framework template, especially in the context of a website, by adding and subtracting?
Yeah.
Where do you want to start? What are the
let's
things
start
that you
with
usually
the-
pull out?
So let's start with subtraction. Yeah. So all of this to me, and I say this to my clients, it all comes down to reading the room and understanding what is going to drive someone through this website and what is going to be important for them to understand. The two places that I most often subtract is in the section directly below the hero, which is the stakes section, and then the step-by-step process plan. So to give you an example of when I might remove the stakes. So stakes is something that you pull out of the failure bucket near the end of your brand script. And as a general rule, as someone who wants to kill bro marketing, I find that there's a very fine line between speaking to potential failure or potential pitfalls of not working with someone and pressing on bruises in a really manipulative way. So even if you're going to include a stake section, you have to be careful that you're not enticing someone to buy for the wrong reasons, like making them feel like they're going to be a failure if they don't hire you or buy your product.
Yeah.
The example I'm thinking of, and this is a client that we recently worked on together, is a really fantastic HIV community center in the Twin Cities called the Aliveness Project. This was an absolutely amazing client to work with, and I'm so happy that you pulled me into it, because it was an opportunity not only to not just lean into, but like absolutely fall into the sense of empathy that I absolutely love writing with. It also allowed me to get really cheeky. Like this is an organization that is writ large just queer as hell. So we got to have a lot of fun with the language and use some slang, and it was a lot of fun. There are a couple of things on this site, one of which I call the Choose Your Own Adventure, which I want to talk about when we get into adding content.
Yes.
Here, stakes did not come into play.
Right.
And the reason for that is, if someone who is at high risk for HIV, or is already living with HIV, or is recently diagnosed with HIV, comes to your site, they don't need to know the stakes of not seeking out preventive services. They don't need to know the stakes of not, getting the food, treatment, etc. that they need. Like, read the room.
Right.
You don't have to paint people, your audience who is looking for someone to trust and to lean on. You don't need to paint them into a corner of more reminders that they could be in a really tough spot. And so I knew from the second I spoke with them, like, oh yeah, stakes is out the window. There's no reason. So what we leaned into instead was the aspirational identity, and then a really just practical, empathetic approach. So the whole idea that they have is this living a free, self-directed, happy self-directed life, or a healthy self-directed life. And so everything that we spoke to on that was, here's how we help you do that.
Yeah.
The failure in the stakes is subtext.
you're not saying this brand doesn't have failure like in it,
No.
right? Like as part of what you're talking to. But the point is you need to know what direction you need to be pushing people. Now I'm sure there are some brands where you really lean into the stakes because you're trying to motivate people around, maybe they don't realize what the stakes are, and you're trying to move them into action from complacency. That's not the case in the case like an organization like this.
We know what's up.
Right. So the stakes, that's one area that you subtract from. You also talked about the plan as an area. So when you say subtract from that, are you just like no plan on the front page, or are you adapting it to something else? What are you talking about?
So typically it's plain old removing it. And the times where I tend to do that is when I'm working with a high-end or luxury client. I'm thinking of a client that Jenna and I worked on together. Her name is Bobby Gregory, and she has a really nice business that's all about journaling and creating a stillness practice that connects you with God and kind of rekindles your purpose in life. And I hesitated on whether to create a plan with that, and ultimately we really focused on like what are the steps of creating your practice and kind of spoke to the transformation through that. But it was down in a section where it made sense in context. Like, okay, you want to get into this, here are the steps to follow. It wasn't like the process of like working with me.
Yeah. And it's kind of about, it's more about like improving and growing into something, not arriving at like we're not, when you talk about success, it's about like success is implementing this in your life. It is not reaching a particular goal, because that's, for most people, it's abstract or it's ongoing or it changes. But these practices, help you get there.
So in the case of a client I'm thinking about right now, they're called Landscape Lighting Pro of Utah. We just relaunched their site. I worked on it with them back in 2019, shortly after I was certified as a guide. And I actually, just before we had this conversation, I pulled it up on the Wayback Machine. And I'm like, so
from where
happy.
It was before you worked with them?
No, from where it was actually the 2019 version. So the 2019 version actually did have a step-by-step process plan. It said getting started is simple. Step 1, consultation. Step 2, installation. Step 3, illumination. And in reading through that, I was like, oh, honey, you were so young.
Now that sounds like such a classic, like 3-step plan for Storybrand, though. Why did you want to get rid of that?
So one of the things that I have learned about Utah Lights is that their competitors are not necessarily outdoor lighting professionals. So they compete with folks who are trying to DIY. So they're competing with the people who are coming to the site who think they can do it themselves with solar lights that they buy at Home Depot. They're competing with landscaping companies who offer this as an add-on. And their real differentiator is this really elevated design mentality. So putting it as like a 1, 2, 3, like, yes, they do come and have a consultation. They do then install the lights. And yes, you do then have, I don't know, lights in your yard. But I felt like it really dumbed down the process and removed the artistry from what it is they do. So instead, we actually added to the site. So there's basically a services section called Our Art of Light that show the different services that they offer and give you this idea that, like, yes, these are things that happen with us, but it's more of what I call a choose your own adventure rather than a step 1, 2, 3. And then instead of a single step that speaks to like, hey, we're going to design this, we created an entire page about it. Choose your own adventure is something that the Storybrand framework and the template that we're given doesn't account for.
Yeah. And I've run into this with a lot of clients where so a real estate agent would be a classic one. You've got buyers and sellers, and they're going to go to different places. Yeah. And so you need that option. The other thing I have found with the plan is that sometimes simplifying what you do down to these 3 steps, especially when it's like schedule a call, get a proposal, experience success. It actually, like that experiencing success thing feels so like glib that it actually makes me trust you less, because I know that this is going to be complicated. And if you make it seem so simple, I actually don't trust you as well. There's I don't remember who, this is somebody else's framework. I'm stealing it. I should have a footnote or something. But there's this idea that you can play in 3 lanes, and there's room usually for a successful company in each lane. You can either have the best product, you can have the best customer service, or like they talk about customer intimacy, or you can have the most efficient process. And so efficient process is usually cheap, right? So if you think of like
that's interesting.
Restaurants, right? So it's easy to use. We make everything simple, efficient, easy. But that's usually associated with like not the high end thing. It's usually associated with the mass volume.
That's so interesting to me, because I could see it another way too, where like we make it easy so you're going to pay a lot for it.
You could frame it differently.
Sure.
I guess they don't have to be around high end, but I think that like with Utah Lights, they are playing in we have the best product.
Yep.
Right? Like our design, installation, and service is just better than what you're going to get with the DIY or with the landscapers. The landscaper is playing in the customer service. Like, we know what you need. We can do all the things.
We can do it all.
You.
Yep.
We understand our customers and everything they need. And then the cheap, easy, that's the DIY option. And so you don't want to accidentally play in the cheap and easy space if you're a high-end product. And
I love that.
Again, this is just taking, again, the framework as a starting point and recognizing it's not that having a plan is bad. And I would say, actually, the design, installation, service that you have there, what you are doing is you're showing them the future of what it looks like.
Definitely shows like the evolution of a customer relationship.
So it's still a plan in some ways, but it's not the classic like 3 steps to success sort of plan.
And I think on the website there's actually language. Maybe it's on the maintenance page. Yeah, the final CTA is we build lifetime client relationships. Let's start ours. And the idea of we're with you over the life of your system and beyond, and then lighting is all we do. Those are the 2 like real. I'm not going to call it a controlling idea, because to be honest, I haven't really delved into that part of Storybrand either.
Well, so
I'm such a bad I'm not a very good student of Storybrand.
I'm gonna just vamp on this whole plan thing, because I feel like this is an area I talk a lot with my clients about. There are different types of plans. So the classic one is the next steps, like how to get started, and it's usually something like schedule a call, get a proposal, experience success. The other one is the what it looks like to work with us plan, which in some ways you don't have numbers here, but we're going to start with design, then we're going to install it, and then we're going to service
our process.
I don't think you should have lots of plans on your wireframe. You have to make a choice usually which of those things matters more to your clients, because I think that choice is kind of a big one when you're implementing Storybrand, because I don't think it's always next steps. I think the next steps are really built around conversion, like getting people to make a decision today. And the process plan, I think, is more important when you have a longer sales cycle or a longer relationship with a client. They need to understand, what does it look like? And this is where Storybrand gets it right. They say people do not want to move into ambiguity. And so if your plan says it's easy to work with us, we schedule a call to learn about you, we give you a proposal, and then you magically experience
and then we
success.
Take all your money and everything's great.
That's really ambiguous. That third step actually introduces
right.
a lot of question into my mind rather than clarity. And so it's one of those ways where I think you can over apply a framework in a way that actually works against the thing that the framework is trying to help you.
To your point, if I am including a really cut and dried step by step, I will often tell my clients, hey, let's consider the scheduling of the consultation. Let's consider that step 0. Because
CTA.
That's the CTA, right? And it's what we're harping on throughout the entire website. So let's assume that they can get from step 0 to step 1. Like they understand that in order to have this next thing happen, they gotta clicky the button.
Right.
So then at the very least you have an extra step if you are really married to 3 steps, which I find pleasing. You know, it's 3s are good in interior design, 3s are good in website design. So if you're going to stick to that, at least you have one more step to play with. The Storymaker website. This is an elopement photographer who's based in Estes Park, Colorado. She's amazing. So we knew we wanted to have something by way of a plan. But this was really an opportunity not only to spell out what the process looks like, but set a few more expectations about what it's, not only how the process works, but what it's like to work with her. So, you know, she's not just finding out, you know, the dates of your wedding, like where do you want this to happen, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then she wants to talk about getting to know you. And the next one is like she sends this obnoxiously detailed elopement guide to people with ideas about where to stay. She sends Airbnbs, caterer recommendations.
This is not a photographer. This is like a travel agent.
Well,
practically.
So I would say she is a cousin of a day of coordinator, but is very clear that is not what she does.
Yeah.
But
that's a lot of value.
She offers a ton of inspiration value. And there's also a ton of inspiration throughout this site that helps people. Like the wedding industrial complex really traps us into this idea of what a wedding should be. And so a big part of this website is designed to help shake people who feel like, I really want to elope, but I don't know how the fuck to go about this. Because I always thought, and my family always made me thought, like this white wedding is the only way to go. So it's really about painting a picture of what it could be like. Like, what if you got to say yes to everything you wanted to do? And then the plan just extrapolates that into a process that is really tangible and makes you feel like, oh, hey, we can actually do this. We can actually make this a reality for us. Yeah. So in that case, it was, this website makes me so happy. It's so fun to be able to break the rules for people I care so much about.
I use the example of wedding photographers all the time where, like, if you're a wedding photographer, you need to talk about and know a lot about weddings, not about photography.
Yep.
Understanding what your audience cares about. What you've done here and what I think she communicates is that this isn't about pretty pictures. This is about pictures of this other thing that you actually want, right?
Yes. It's about making memories that are going to last for the rest of your life.
Well, and that's being the guide, not a vendor, right? Like you're guiding them. In Storybrand, here's I think something that everyone should do. If you've storybranded your website, if you are a guide and you are doing websites or wireframes for people, once you are done with the wireframe, you need to step back and look at it from, a 30,000 foot view and ask, is this actually clear to whoever's on this website? And do I really make the customer the hero? And if you can answer yes to those two questions, the template has helped you, however you've applied it, to get to the goal of this framework in general. But if you look at this website or you share it with people and they're like,
and my God, please share it with people. Get some eyes on that sucker.
Get some, especially early on, if this is the first one you've done, and ask, like, what is confusing about this site? Is it clear? Like, does this make sense? And talk to people who are not close to it either. Like, bring in people who have not worked on it or who don't know that industry very well.
Because, honestly, get some people who don't know Storybrand.
This is the curse of knowledge. I think that actually there's a
virus
potentially in Storybrand world sometimes where people are so close to the framework that they forget how, like, what they're trying to do with it, which is to be clear and position the customer as the real hero. Okay, let's talk about adding stuff to so the Storybrand framework. Let's say we could say maybe it's I don't know if it's necessary, but it's not always sufficient. I know that for sure. There are some times when you can't just have just the template, just the brand script. You need something else on there. What are some of the things that you typically or often need to add to a website that the Storybrand kind of classic framework doesn't cover?
So I think the biggest thing, and this is actually, I've been taking a survey of folks who have or plan to DIY their homepage copy. One of the biggest struggles I have heard across industries is I don't know how to speak to multiple audiences effectively. And within the Storybrand framework, I think that's a really big stumbling block because especially, Storybrand doesn't actually call it a homepage. They call it a landing page. I guess you can think of it as a landing page in that it's a springboard, or it can be.
Yeah. Yep.
Although the hope is, of course, to get someone to start throwing their money at you before they even get to the bottom, which is what we would all love. But the real goal of a website is to give someone what they need to take whatever next step makes sense for them. So I am a big fan of a different form of choose your own adventure where you speak to an umbrella message or get into your philosophy and then immediately let someone self-select as a certain audience or a certain need.
Yep.
So where this doesn't work is where someone may not be aware of their need, right? So if it is not very clear there are a lot of software companies that do this where they speak to really specific use cases, and if someone comes to your site and they've heard good things about you, but they actually don't know what the fuck they need, that's where you're going to lose people. But in the case that we talked about before we started recording, there's, unless we talked about it while we were recording, is in the real estate world.
Yes.
So where a real estate agent is almost always going to have at least two audiences. They're going to have their buyer, they're going to have their seller. And the needs are very different. In fact, they're almost opposite. And so the homepage really is a landing page in that point, because the goal is probably not to get someone to convert immediately, but to ping them over to the next, essentially, like, sub homepage.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a child homepage where then you get to do the exact same thing all over again, and hopefully you have taken the time to Storybrand, each of your audiences in addition to the, maybe a more general message.
Another place where this comes up a lot is with nonprofits, right? So nonprofits, and this is where I think I might have a different perspective than the official Storybrand line. I don't know exactly what JJ would say.
You do a lot of nonprofit work.
We have done, and the hard thing is nonprofits want their website to get donations, and it can be a really bad. It can be weird and manipulative if you focus your homepage on the donor is the hero, right? Like that can be a really icky thing. Like what you generally want to do is you want to make the people who are using services or that you're helping, whatever that is, you want to elevate those people,
Yep.
again, not yourself as the hero, but like you want to, bring dignity and,
Yes.
elevation to them, not the donors, not the organization.
Yeah.
But the reason the website exists usually is to get donations, right? There's this challenge sometimes between how do you balance those two things, and you make some choices. So this would be another example where at a higher level, I would consider breaking some of the Storybrand framework a little bit so that you can do what's right, for the dignity of the people that are served by the organization, rather than the most like marketingly, is that a word? Marketingly
It is now.
Effective, story branded for donors sort of thing.
And to come back around to the point, like, read the room.
Yes.
You might want donations, but who is the, who are the people who are most likely to visit your website? Like, again, in the case of aliveness, it's important for them to get donations. And I think that there is a pretty prominent donate button in their main navigation.
Yep.
But they actually offer a really wide array of public services, and they have the folks who are living with HIV, they have a massive number of services for them, and that's what they wanted to communicate. So their Choose Your Own Adventure is HIV prevention and like HIV support services. And then I think farther down on the homepage we speak to, and this is maybe something that I would add to the list of things to add, would be, add separate sections for those things. I think that there's a separate section for donate, there's a separate section for volunteer, and there's a separate section for jobs. And I don't think that they're important enough to them that they wanted to include them on the homepage, but they're far enough down on the page that it seemed like someone who would be looking for a job or a volunteer opportunity would still be incredibly well served by reading everything that's there. And they might continue to read until either they hit the so beautifully named junk drawer, or I hate that. I understand it. It's where everything else goes.
Yeah.
And it's more important than that. And then they also would see like, oh, hey, there's a section here just for me. And I want to read about it. So like allowing yourself just to create the content that you think like, hey, somebody actually might benefit from this.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be like a whole thing.
Here's my big thing that I think a lot of websites need that is not, it's implied in the Storybrand framework, but it is not explicitly said, which is the actual services or product or solution or whatever that you offer, right?
Yep.
So
that's a thing in my brand script session where I say, okay, now define the solution that you offer. Like,
right.
What's the how in between the problem and the success?
Well, so actually there's two, since you bring up how, I would say if you're a guide or if you're working on it, two things maybe to add to your brand script, document would be, these can both be optional, because I think sometimes the plan shows the solution and it solves that. Sometimes the guide section also like says, this is what we do. But sometimes you need a solutions section or a how section. The other one that I found, I got this from, I think Wes Gay said this, was a why section between the external and the internal problems. Because sometimes there's a problem, but there's a problem behind the problem. And Storybrand used to have a villain section. They had a fourth one. And again, I think that's kind of optional. But
I've actually brought the villain back. I'm going to vintage Storybrand. It doesn't always get mentioned in copy, but I'm gonna save that for a second. Keep talking about the why because I love this.
So I was working with a learn to read program, and so the external problem was a lot of kids are reading below grade level. And something like 70% of kids by fourth grade are reading below grade level.
Is the why systemic inequity?
Well, kind of. The why is that most reading like reading programs don't work for every kid. And, a lot of the classical reading programs they work really well for, as like the brand's position is, you have natural readers who, whatever program you give them, they're going to figure out how to read. And then there's other kids who, they don't learn auditory learning styles or, whatever the visual auditory stuff. They need to use their whole body, as they learn. And so a program that engages.
I love your clients.
They're great. This is a very, very cool program. And so the why is, so the problem is most kids are reading below grade level, but the why is because the programs that they're using aren't a right fit for most kids.
See, my external section just gets really long.
Yeah.
Because I always try to dig at least one level deeper. Mm-hmm. So, but I love that you have a connective why. Mm-hmm.
And they obviously go together in a lot of cases, but there are times when you're just going to want to have the problem is kids read below grade level. That's why we've created the solution. And other times you need to be able to explain like why.
In the case of your client, like if you had decided, we really don't want to spell out the stakes here, mm-hmm. you could very easily have that section directly below the hero speak to that why and mm-hmm. almost allay the fear of failure with like, hey, there's this, and this is what I wanted to say about the villain, and I learned this in my feminist copywriting certification. The villain is never a personal failing. It's never a competitor. It's a bigger thing. So it's this third party, like it's a dark cloud, right? Yep. And like the fact that
the powers and principalities.
Yes, and like in this case, like honestly, I would say it still comes back to systemic inequities, but like the idea that reading programs aren't a one size fits all. Like they're designed for this very normative version of a child that has X, Y, and Z things in their life that prepare them for this. It doesn't think about, it's potentially ableist because it doesn't think about children with learning disabilities or whatever. Let me not turn this into that. But but I think, speaking to that, and especially in a parental space where a parent is already like, shit, am I screwing up? Am I doing something wrong? Why isn't my kid learning? Speaking to that villain and saying like, hey, we understand the stakes are high. Here's a reason this might not be. This might not be working. Like it's not you. It's this. So like that can be another really powerful place to stand something in for stakes. The other thing that I always include in my brand scripts is before jumping into the problem, I want to really tightly identify what their ICA is. Who is your ideal customer? Like, who are we actually talking about? And then apart from that, and this, if you're a guide and you're listening to this, this could be a separate engagement. Learn more about that person. Create a persona. Get an understanding of where do they get their information? Like, what are they talking about? Like, do some social listening. Get an idea, because that's also going to inform your content. Like, it's very different if you're speaking to, well, honestly, like if you're speaking to a donor versus someone who wants to prevent HIV versus someone who already has it and is freaked the hell out because they just found out. Like, knowing exactly who that person is and not just the problem that they're facing is going to help you more deeply empathize with them. Yeah. So that's an important addition to my framework.
So I'm gonna summarize a little bit of what we talked about.
Do it.
For when to break Storybrand framework. So one thing we talked about was sometimes you need to break outside the templates in order to be different so that you stand out in a crowded space. Sometimes you need to subtract from your brand script or your audience because it isn't needed or it's doing the wrong thing for your brand. And so read the room, understand when it's needed and when it's not. Yeah. I will say also there, as someone from a design background, less is almost always more. And so if you don't need something and you can get rid of it, totally do it. Just get rid of it when you can. Now, if it makes it harder to understand, it's not as clear, keep it in, but get rid of it.
You might have some questions when you see my website, because I think I probably
is more and more.
Maybe I potentially took a bit of a maximalist perspective on mine, but that's a choice.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. Like, understanding, like, does this need to be here?
My art professors would say, like, it's not finished when you can't add anything else to the project. It's finished when you can't take anything else away.
That's also like, there's I don't know if it's apocryphal, but a quote from Coco Chanel about, like, after you get dressed, take off three accessories before you leave the house. Nice.
So, difference better than better. Subtract when you can, add when you need to, and maybe the last subpoint, something you said that I think is interesting is there are parts of a brand script that I think of sometimes as like shadow elements that get written down to inform the brand script, but never make their way to live copy, right? So for me, often the aspirational identity, where they go is in the copy, but where they're coming from is not. Like the identity transformation. The identity transformation is often can be pretty dark, right?
Yeah.
So, with this reading program, we were talking to parents, and parents feel like a failure if their kid is struggling to read. We're not going to put that in the copy. That's not.
Yeah, if your from is like a freaking failure.
Right. But that informs, we know where they're coming from. We don't need to say it out loud. Again, it's kind of implied, and then we're helping them, bringing them to this aspirational identity.
Yeah, I mean, if Storybrand is the science, we are in charge of the art. You have to decide. Critical thinking is so important for us as guides to just really understand what is the need here. How can we best serve? And how can we make it sound and look good?
Yeah.
Because, we should delight people when they come to our website, even if it's for a pretty basic service. There's not enough delight in this world. Let's make it our job to bring some into it.
When I was in art school, I read a book of essays called Air Guitar, and it was by an art critic, and he has one essay called The Heresy of Zone Defense. And it's about basketball and also abstract expressionism. And so
of course it is.
Of course. Wait, and what he ends up talking about is how games with really intelligently thought through rules actually give you more opportunity to be creative. And so it's the guidelines that push you into a little bit of a box that you then push against them, and it allows you to use them as a way to generate creativity. And for him, it's, the fact that the rules required in the NBA required this man-on-man defense allowed there to be these really incredible plays that would only be able to be created if it was because of this context of the rules. And then he talks about how the rules of painting allowed Jackson Pollock to think well, maybe just splattering paint is also painting. And people were like, well, it's paint on a canvas, so I guess it's painting.
Technically.
But so it's fascinating. Yeah. So I think having these frameworks, embrace frameworks, because they teach you so much. Like you said at the beginning, when you found Storybrand, it taught you a lot about work you were already doing, but gave you a different way to think about it, which has then allowed you to go beyond that and have and create even better writing.
Maybe we can think of the Storybrand framework as a kite string, right? Where we have this anchor, but then let's just blow in the wind. Let's just blow in the wind.
Yeah.
I truly think that having the guardrails of Storybrand has helped me play more. And I have a blast with it, but it almost feels like I have something to fall back on that will explain my slightly off-kilter actions. I can always go back and say, oh, here's why I did this.
Right.
Rachel Zur, who owns Magic Words Marketing, incredibly smart and intuitive guide. She has an email that she sent out a few weeks ago that said, it says here on the paper, and she talks about it from the perspective of, your business's policies, but it can also very much be, a messaging guide where, both as an outside copywriter, yes, I can look back and say, hey, this is what we decided on. Here's how the copy translates back to that. But also, you can hand it to your people if you have a team and say, it says on this paper, this is what we're supposed to do. We decided on this. Go to town. And
I need to have a whole nother podcast episode, I think, about how to use the Storybrand framework to shut up the loudest guy in the room so that other people get to talk.
I will listen to that.
But it's true though, like when you have that outside authority or expertise coming in, hey, this is the framework, this is how we're going to do it.
Yep.
It helps everybody. It moves things from like, well, this is what I like or this is what I think to like, how do we work with this framework? So it's great at getting a lot of voices with differing opinions on the same page so you can actually make progress. But
really good consensus builder.
Yeah. Okay, well, this is the longest podcast that I've recorded for Words First before, and I'm sure we could keep talking forever, but
yes, we could.
We're gonna
see also our other podcast.
That's right. Yeah, if you've never checked out the Hello First Name podcast, season 1 is out, and season 2 is who knows? We'll see. Maybe there'll be a season 2 someday, but no guarantees. Paige, where can people find you? And if they wanted to learn more about your wisdom, how do they do that?
Well, your mileage may vary on that part, but so what I would most love for your listeners to do is jump on my email list. You can always check out my website. It's pageworthy.com, like a page in a book, but with an I in the middle. But I also have a free resource. It's available on my homepage. It's called Win Hearts with Words, and it is 15 copy tweaks that you can use to create a more authentic brand voice and brand experience on your website and all of your marketing materials. So It's got lots of practical examples from the real world of marketing. It's got some spicy hot takes from me because you cannot get out of a conversation with me without a spicy hot take. And once you download that, you will be fully in my funnel. I send a weekly email that I call Words Matter with stories and thoughts on marketing, brand voice, being a good human.
It's a great newsletter. It's one of the few that I actually read every week. So yes, people should get that. What kind of companies or who should reach out to you if they want to work with you? I mean, they have to give a shit. I know that.
So I'm really industry agnostic. If you care really deeply about the people you serve and you really want to lean into empathy and be super ethical in your marketing, I'm your gal. I would love to talk with you about where you're at and, if Storybrand with Edge feels good to you.
Yes.
And it's not all like voicey, sassy people who I work with. I work with all kinds of businesses, and it's my job to really put on their voice like a coat when I'm writing for them.
Yes.
And also, if you aren't, having an appetite right now for full service done for you, I also offer hourly coaching. So if you want to punch up something you've already got going, want another set of eyes on stuff, I would love to work with you on an hourly basis.
Nice. I hope a lot of people listen to this podcast. I think this will be an interesting one in the guide community, especially. I hope people check it out. Great conversation, as always. All right. This has been the Words First podcast, and join us next time. Like, subscribe, do whatever you need to do on those podcast apps that, all the stuff everybody else says that helps out their podcast.
Really hard sell here.
You should do that stuff for us as well. Okay. All right. We're going to leave it there. See you later. Bye.